The first time he looked at me, he didn't see my face. He saw what I was trying to hide. The fluorescent lights above Register 3 flickered like they were tired of watching people pretend everything was fine, and I stood there in my blue uniform, scanning items one by one. Beep, 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 my fingers moving faster than my thoughts, because if I stopped, even for a second, I might feel everything I was trying to bury, the ache in my ribs when I breathed too deep, the dull sting around my wrist where the fabric of my sleeve brushed against skin that hadn't healed right, and the worst part wasn't the pain. It was how normal it had started to feel, like background noise you forget is even there until the room goes quiet. Paper or plastic? I asked without looking up, my voice steady, practiced, safe. The way you learn to sound when you don't want anyone asking questions. And that's when the silence changed, not louder, not sharper, just heavier, like the air had shifted direction. I glanced up out of habit and saw him standing on the other side of the counter, tall, still, dressed in a way that didn't belong in a place that smelled like cheap coffee and floor cleaner. His dark coat untouched by the rain outside, his presence too, controlled for someone just buying groceries at almost midnight. And it wasn't fear I felt at first, it was awareness, the kind that crawls under your skin and tells you this person notices things other people don't. I looked away too quickly, reaching for the next item, scanning, bagging, focusing on the rhythm, beep, slide, fold, repeat, but my hands betrayed me, just slightly, a tremor when I reached for his receipt. And I hated that he saw it. I knew he did before he even spoke, because men like him didn't miss details. You're shaking, he said quietly, not accusing, not concerned, just stating it like a fact that had already been decided. It's cold, I replied, forcing a small laugh that didn't sound like mine, even to my own ears. And I kept my eyes on the register screen because meeting his gaze felt like stepping into something I couldn't control. The total flashed, $18.47. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a bill, but instead of handing it to me, he let it slip from his fingers, slow enough that it didn't feel like an accident. It landed near my side of the counter, and for a second I hesitated, something in my chest tightening like a warning, but I couldn't just leave it there, so I stepped forward and bent down to pick it up. And that's when it happened, not something loud or dramatic, just a small, sharp reaction my body couldn't hide, a flinch, barely visible, but enough for him to see everything I hadn't said. I straightened too quickly, placing the bill on the counter, my pulse suddenly too loud in my ears, and when I finally looked up, he was watching me differently now, not curious, not casual, but focused, like he had just solved something without needing all the pieces. Does he use his right hand? He asked, and the question didn't make sense for half a second, not until it did. Not until my breath caught in my throat and my fingers tightened around the edge of the register. I don't know what you mean, I said quickly, too quickly, the words tripping over themselves as I grabbed the receipt and handed it to him. Have a good night. The line came out automatic, rehearsed, an exit I'd used 1,000 times before, but he didn't move, didn't take the receipt right away, and that silence stretched just long enough to feel dangerous. You don't have to lie to me, he said, still calm, still controlled, and somehow that made it worse. Because he wasn't pushing, wasn't raising his voice, wasn't doing anything that would let me justify shutting him out. He was just there, seeing too much. Please, I whispered before I could stop myself, the words slipping out like something fragile. Just take your receipt. And for a moment, I thought he might say something else, something that would break whatever thin wall I was holding together. But instead, he took the paper from my hand, his fingers brushing mine just enough to make me flinch again, and I hated that he noticed that too. He always noticed. I could tell. He gave a small nod, almost like he'd made a decision I wasn't part of, and then he turned and walked out into the rain without another word. The door chimed softly behind him, and just like that, he was gone. But the air didn't feel the same anymore. I stood there staring at nothing, my reflection faint in the dark screen of the register, my heart still racing for reasons I didn't fully understand. Because men had seen the bruises before, they just chose not to ask. And this one, he didn't ask, he knew. And somehow that felt worse, because knowing meant something might change. And I had learned the hard way that change was never gentle. I told myself it was nothing, just another customer, just another moment that would disappear the second my shift ended. but my hands would not steady no matter how many times I wiped them on my apron, and the echo of his voice stayed with me long after the door had closed, quiet but precise, like it had carved something into the back of my mind that I could not ignore. The store felt too bright after he left. Every sound too sharp, the hum of the refrigerators, the distant buzz of the soda machine, the soft shuffle of a late-night customer down aisle 5. Everything felt louder because something inside me had shifted. I kept replaying it, the way he had looked at me, not with pity, not with curiosity, but with certainty, and that was the part that unsettled me the most, because certainty meant he believed what he saw. And if he believed it, then maybe it was no longer invisible. Maybe I was not invisible. And that thought was more terrifying than anything else. "Emily, you okay?" My coworker Jenna called from the other register, her voice casual, but her eyes searching. I forced a smile, the kind that had become second nature, the kind that made people stop asking questions. "Yeah, just tired," I said, and she nodded like that made sense, because it always did. Tired was acceptable. Tired was normal. Tired did not make people uncomfortable. The clock on the wall ticked closer to midnight, each minute dragging slower than the last, and when my shift finally ended, I felt it in my bones, that deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with standing for 8 hours and everything to do with holding yourself together when you wanted to fall apart. I grabbed my bag from the break room, the fabric worn at the edges, the zipper sticking like it always did, and I stepped outside into the cool air, the night quiet except for the distant sound of traffic and the occasional flicker of headlights passing by. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, more out of habit than cold, and started the walk to my apartment. It was only 6 blocks, a straight line down streets I knew too well, streets that felt safe during the day, but different at night, shadows stretching longer, silence feeling heavier. I kept my head down, my pace steady, counting steps the way I always did. 1, 2, 3, like if I focused on something simple, nothing else could catch up to me. But tonight felt different, not because of the street, not because of the dark, but because of the feeling that I was not alone in a way I could not explain. I turned the corner onto Maple Street and stopped for just a second, my breath catching as I noticed a car parked across from my building, black, sleek, out of place in a neighborhood where most cars had dents and stories. The engine was off, but something about it made my stomach tighten. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just a car, just another detail in a night that had already felt too long, and I forced myself to keep walking, each step heavier than the last. I reached the front door of my building, the chipped paint and flickering hallway light greeting me like something familiar, something I could understand. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air stale, the faint smell of old carpet, and someone cooking too late, and I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. Safe, at least for now. I climbed the stairs slowly, my legs aching, my mind still racing, replaying everything, his voice, his question, the way he had looked at me like I was not something to ignore, and I did not know why that stayed with me more than anything else. I reached my apartment door and paused, my hand hovering over the knob, listening, because listening had become instinct, the silence on the other side felt normal, too normal, and that was how I knew he was already there. The door opened before I could turn the handle, and the familiar tension filled the space, heavy and suffocating, his presence filling the room without a word. I stepped inside slowly, my heart steady but my thoughts loud, because tonight something had changed, not here, not in this room, but somewhere outside of it, somewhere I could not see yet, and for the first time in a long time, I was not just afraid of what would happen next, I was afraid of what might not happen, because someone had noticed, and people like him did not forget. I learned to read silence the way other people read words, the slight shift in breathing, the way a room held its weight before something was said, and the moment I stepped inside, I knew tonight was not going to end quietly. He was standing near the window, the only light coming from the street lamp outside, casting long shadows across the floor, his back to me, shoulders tense in a way that meant something had already gone wrong before I even walked through the door. I closed it slowly behind me, careful not to make noise, as if quiet could somehow soften whatever was waiting. "You are late," he said without turning around, his voice low, controlled, and I swallowed, setting my bag down by the door. My shift ended at midnight. I replied, keeping my tone even, careful, always careful, Because the smallest thing could change everything. He turned then, his eyes scanning me, not gently, not kindly, but searching for something I could not predict, and I held still, the way you do when you hope stillness might make you invisible. You look different, he said, stepping closer, and my chest tightened, not because of what he saw, but because of what he might think he saw, just tired. I said again, the same answer, the same shield, but it felt thinner now, weaker, like it might break if pushed too hard. His gaze lingered on my face, then dropped briefly to my arms, to the place I had made sure was covered, and I felt that familiar tension coil in my stomach, waiting, bracing. But instead of moving closer, instead of doing anything I expected, he stepped back, just slightly, like something else had caught his attention, like his thoughts had shifted somewhere I could not follow. And that was worse, the unpredictability, the pause, the way the room seemed to hold its breath. Who was he? He asked suddenly, and the question did not make sense at first, not until it did, not until my mind flashed back to the store, to the man who had looked at me like he already knew everything, and my heart stumbled over itself. What? I said, too quickly, and his eyes narrowed just enough for me to notice. The one you were thinking about when you walked in, he said, his voice quieter now, more focused, and I realized then that I had made a mistake, not a visible one. Not something obvious, but something small, something internal. I had brought that moment home with me, and he had seen it, or felt it, or sensed it in a way I could not explain. No one, I said, shaking my head, stepping past him toward the kitchen like. Movement might end the conversation, but he did not follow, and that silence stretched again, heavy, uncomfortable. Emily, he said my name slowly, like it meant something different coming from him, like it was not just a name but a warning. And I stopped, my hand resting on the edge of the counter, my breath shallow. You think I do not notice things? He continued. And there it was, that shift, that subtle tightening in the air that told me this was no longer just a question. It was something deeper, something I could not deflect as easily as before. I turned slightly, not fully facing him, not fully turning away, caught somewhere in between. I said it was nothing. I replied, and for a moment, there was only silence, no movement, no sound, just that space between us filled with everything unspoken. And then he exhaled, slow, controlled, like he was deciding something. You should be more careful, he said finally, and the words landed differently than I expected, not sharp, not accusing, but heavy, like they carried something underneath I could not quite reach. I nodded, because nodding was easier than speaking, easier than explaining something I did not even understand myself. And the conversation ended there, just like that, not resolved, not finished, just paused, like a storm that had not decided whether to arrive or pass. He moved away, picking up his jacket from the chair, his movements precise, deliberate, and I watched him without meaning to. Something in my chest tightening again, but this time it was not fear, not entirely. It was something else, something unfamiliar. Something that had started the moment that man in the store had looked at me and refused to look away, because now I knew two things I had not known before. One, I was no longer invisible, and two, the kind of people who notice things do not stop once they start. And as the door closed behind him, leaving the apartment quiet again, I realized that whatever had begun at that register was not over. It had only followed me home, and somewhere out there, someone was already deciding what to do next. I barely slept that night, not because of noise or fear or anything loud enough to name, but because silence felt different now, like it was waiting for something, like it was holding its breath just like I was. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face again, not the one in my apartment, not the one I had learned to read and avoid, but the other one, the one who had looked at me like I was a problem already halfway solved. And I did not understand why that unsettled me more than anything else. Morning came too quickly, gray light slipping through the thin curtains, and I moved through my routine on autopilot. Coffee that tasted like nothing, clothes chosen more for coverage than comfort, long sleeves even though the weather did not call for it, habits built from repetition and necessity. I left the apartment quietly, the hallway empty, the building still asleep, and for a moment, standing outside, I almost convinced myself everything was the same. That last night had been nothing more than a strange interruption in a life that followed predictable patterns. But then I saw it again. The same car, parked across the street, black, still, out of place, and this time I knew I was not imagining it. My steps slowed without meaning to, my eyes flicking toward it just long enough to confirm what I already felt. Someone was inside. I could not see clearly through the tinted windows, but I did not need to. The presence was enough, the awareness, the way my instincts reacted before my thoughts could catch up. I told myself to keep walking, to act normal, because normal was safe. Normal did not invite attention, but it was too late for that. Attention had already found me. I crossed the street, my heartbeat steady but louder than usual, each step measured, deliberate, and as I passed the car, I felt it, that same shift in the air, that same quiet pressure, like being watched by someone who did not need to move to make their presence known. I did not stop, did not look directly, just kept walking, but in the reflection of a store window, I saw the driver's side door open, slow, controlled, and something inside me tightened. Not panic, not yet, but something close to it. I reached the corner and turned, increasing my pace just slightly, enough to feel like I was doing something without drawing attention. And then I heard it, footsteps behind me, not rushed, not aggressive, just there, matching my pace with a precision that felt intentional. I stopped, because stopping felt better than pretending I did not hear it. And when I turned, he was there, the same man from the store, standing a few feet away like he had always been part of this street, like this moment had been waiting to happen, his expression unchanged, calm, unreadable, and for a second, neither of us spoke. The city moved around us, cars passing, people in the distance, but in that space, everything felt still. You should not be walking alone, he said finally, his voice the same as before, quiet but certain, and I frowned, confusion mixing with something sharper. I do this every day, I replied, crossing my arms instinctively, a small barrier. Even though I knew it would not mean much to someone like him, his gaze dropped briefly to the movement, to the way my sleeves shifted, and then back to my face. That does not make it safe, he said, and there was no argument in his tone, just a statement, like he was describing something that already existed whether I accepted it or not. Why are you here? I asked, because that question felt more important than anything else, more urgent than whatever he thought he knew about me. And he did not answer right away, his eyes studying me in that same way, that same unsettling focus, like he was measuring something invisible. Because you asked me not to, he said, and the words did not make sense at first, not until I remembered the way I had whispered please, not knowing what I was asking him to stop, not understanding what he had already decided. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with realization, slow and heavy. I did not ask you to follow me, I said, my voice firmer now, trying to reclaim something I had already started to lose, and for the first time, something shifted in his expression, not amusement, not anger, just the slightest change, like he had expected that response. I am not following you, he replied. I am making sure no one else is, and that should have felt reassuring. It should have felt like protection, but instead it felt like something else entirely, something bigger, something I did not understand how to accept, because protection from someone like him did not come without weight, without consequence, and as I stood there, caught between leaving and staying, between rejecting and listening, I realized that whatever had started in that store was no longer something I could ignore, because now he was here, in my world, in my space, and people like him did not step into places like this without changing them forever. I should have walked away. I should have said something simple and final like this is not your business. But the words stayed stuck somewhere between my chest and my throat because a part of me already knew it was too late for that. He had crossed into my life the moment he decided to notice me. And people like him did not undo decisions. They followed them through to the end. You do not get to decide what is safe for me, I said instead, my voice steadier than I felt. And for a second, I thought that might be enough to push him back, to draw a line he would respect. But he did not move, did not step closer, did not step away. He just stood there, calm, grounded, like the street itself adjusted around him instead of the other way around. You are right, he said, and the agreement caught me off guard, enough that I blinked, my guard slipping just slightly. Then why are you here? I asked again, because that question had not gone away, it had only grown heavier, and this time he answered without pause. Because you are not the only one who notices patterns," he said, his gaze steady on mine, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice quieter now, not because I was afraid of him, but because I was starting to understand that this conversation was not simple, not surface level. It had layers I had not seen coming. "It means," he said slowly, like he was choosing each word carefully, "that someone who hurts you does not suddenly stop. They repeat. They escalate. They test limits." My stomach tightened at the way he said it. Not like a guess, not like a concern, but like a fact he had seen before, many times. And that realization made something inside me shift again. Because this was not just about me anymore. This was about what he knew, what he had seen, what kind of world he came from. "You do not know anything about me," I said, trying to hold on to something, some version of control. But even as I said it, I knew it sounded weaker than I wanted it to, because he had already proven he knew enough. "I know enough," he replied. Not harsh, not forceful, just certain, and that certainty pressed against me in a way I did not know how to push back against. I looked away first, breaking eye contact because it felt like the only way to breathe again. Cars passed behind him, a bus slowing at the corner, people moving through their morning without noticing the quiet tension standing between us, and I wondered how something so invisible could feel so heavy. "You should go," I said finally, my voice softer now, less defensive, more tired, because arguing with him felt like trying to move something that did not want to be moved, and for a moment, I thought he might refuse, might stand there and continue this strange, unsettling conversation until I gave in to something I did not understand. But instead, he nodded once, a small, controlled motion. "I will," he said, and there was something in the way he said it that made my chest tighten again, because it did not sound like an ending. It sounded like a pause, like something temporarily set aside, not abandoned. He turned then, walking back toward the car without looking back, his steps measured, unhurried, like he knew exactly how much space to give and exactly when to take it back. I stood there longer than I should have, watching as he opened the door and disappeared inside, the engine starting with a low hum, and for a second, I thought that was it, that he would drive away, and this would become something I could file away as strange and forgettable. But the car did not move right away. It stayed there, idling, like it was waiting, not for me, but for something else, something unseen, and that was when I felt it again. That subtle shift in the air, that quiet warning that had nothing to do with him this time, my instincts tightening, my breath catching slightly as I turned my head, scanning the street, and that was when I saw him, across the road, leaning casually against the corner of the building like he had nowhere else to be, like he had always been there, his posture relaxed but his eyes fixed on me in a way that made my chest go cold. And in that moment, everything connected, not perfectly, not completely, but enough for me to understand that the man in the car had not come here without reason, and more importantly, he had not been the only one watching. And as the car door across the street finally closed and the engine shifted, I realized with a clarity that made my pulse quicken that I had just stepped into something far bigger than I had ever intended, because now there were two kinds of attention in my life, the kind that watched to protect, and the kind that watched to control, and I did not know which one would reach me first. I did not move at first, not because I could not, but because something inside me was trying to understand what I was seeing before reacting to it. My eyes fixed on him across the street, the way he stood there like time did not touch him, like he belonged to the silence instead of the noise. And for a second, I wondered how long he had been there, how many mornings had passed where I never noticed, how many times he had watched me walk out of that building thinking I was alone. My chest tightened at the thought, not sharp, not sudden, but slow and heavy, like realization. Settling into place piece by piece, the car engine behind me shifted, a low sound that broke the stillness just enough to remind me that I was not caught between one presence, but two, and that made everything feel narrower, like the space around me had shrunk without warning. I forced myself to move then, turning away from both of them, because standing still felt like giving something away, like admitting I did not know what to do. And I could not afford that. Not here, not now. I walked toward the bus stop at the end of the block, my steps steady, my breathing controlled, but every instinct in my body was awake, every sound sharper, every movement around me carrying weight. I could feel it without looking, the way attention followed me, Not loud, not obvious, but present, like a shadow that stayed just outside the edge of sight. The bus arrived with a hiss of air and a grind of brakes, and I stepped on without hesitation, dropping my fare into the box, the driver barely glancing at me as I moved toward a seat near the middle, not too close to the front, not too far in the back, somewhere that felt balanced, somewhere I could see without being seen too easily. I sat down and finally let my gaze shift toward the window, careful, controlled, and that was when I saw him again, the man from across the street, stepping onto the bus just before the doors closed, his posture the same, relaxed but deliberate, like he had expected this, like this was always where he was. Going next, my stomach tightened, not with panic, but with certainty, the kind that settles in when something you hoped was coincidence proves itself to be something else, something intentional. I looked away quickly, my hands folding in my lap to keep them from trembling, my mind racing through possibilities I did not want to name. And then, almost as if the morning had decided to complete the pattern, I caught a glimpse of the black car in the reflection of the bus window, moving slowly. Behind us, not close enough to draw attention, not far enough to disappear, and that was when the truth became impossible to ignore. This was not random. This was not chance. This was something unfolding around me, something I had stepped into. Without realizing, I kept my eyes forward after that, focusing on the rhythm of the bus, the stops, the doors opening and closing, people getting on and off without noticing anything unusual, because to them, there was nothing unusual, just another morning, just another ride. But for me, every second felt stretched, every movement carried meaning. I could feel him behind me somewhere, not too close, not too far. His presence measured in the same careful way everything else about him seemed to be, and I wondered what he wanted, not in a loud, desperate way, but in a quiet, controlled way that searched for answers without expecting to find them easily. Because people like him did not follow without reason. They did not watch without purpose. And that thought made something inside me shift again, not fear this time, but something colder, something sharper, awareness. I reached my stop and stood, the motion deliberate, my body steady even if my thoughts were not. The doors opened, and I stepped off into the cool morning air, the street busier here, more people, more movement, and for a second I thought maybe that would be enough. Maybe the crowd would break whatever this was, but I knew better. Crowds did not stop attention. They only hit it better. I walked toward the store, the familiar sign coming into view, the glass doors reflecting the street behind me. And as I reached for the handle, I glanced back just once, just enough to confirm what I already felt. He was there, a few steps behind, not rushing, not hiding, just present. And somewhere further back, I caught the faint reflection of that same car turning the corner. And that was when it settled fully. The understanding that this was no longer something happening around me. It was something happening to me. And the moment I stepped inside the store, the cool air hitting my face, the sound of the registers already beeping in the distance, I realized something else, something I had not considered until now. Being seen had changed everything, because now I was not just trying to survive unnoticed, I was being watched from both sides, and I did not know which one would decide to act first. I thought the store would feel different once I stepped inside, like the walls and the lights would somehow shield me from whatever had followed me here, but it did not. It felt the same as always, the same hum of fluorescent lights, the same faint smell of coffee and cleaning solution, the same steady rhythm of registers scanning items, and that normalcy felt almost unreal compared to the awareness still pulsing under my skin. I moved behind the counter, clocked in, and slipped into routine, because routine was the only thing I knew how to hold on to. Beep, bag, receipt, smile, repeat, my hands moving automatically. Even as my mind stayed somewhere else entirely, tracking, listening, noticing everything I had ignored before. The bell above the door chimed and my chest tightened before I even looked up, but it was just a woman with a stroller, tired, distracted, normal. I exhaled slowly, forcing my shoulders to relax, reminding myself that not every movement meant something. Not every presence carried weight. But that thought did not last long, because a few minutes later, the bell chimed again, and this time when I looked up, it was him, the man from the bus, stepping inside like he had every right to be there, his eyes finding mine immediately, not searching, not scanning, just landing. like they had been waiting for that exact moment. I looked down quickly, focusing on the register, on the items in front of me, on anything that did not involve acknowledging him. But I could feel it, the way his attention did not leave, the way it stayed fixed even as he moved through the aisles, picking up items he did not seem interested in, his movements too deliberate to be casual. And I understood then that this was not about shopping. This was about proximity, about staying close enough without crossing a line that would draw attention. I swallowed, my throat dry as I finished with the current customer, my smile automatic, my voice steady. But inside, everything felt sharper, more defined. Like my senses had been turned up without warning. The next customer stepped forward, and I focused on them, on the normal interaction, on the familiar script that kept things simple. But even then, I could feel it, the presence behind them, waiting, and when the line finally cleared, there he was, placing a bottle of water and a pack of gum on the counter like this was any other transaction, like we were just two strangers sharing a moment that meant nothing. That will be $4.20, I said, my voice even, my eyes fixed on the screen, because looking at him felt like inviting something I was not ready to face. He did not respond right away, and the silence stretched just enough to make me aware of it, to make me aware of him. You noticed, he said finally, and the words were quiet, almost lost under the hum of the store, but they landed clearly, unmistakably. My fingers paused on the register for just a second before I forced them to keep moving. I do not know what you are talking about, I replied, the same defense, the same shield, but it felt thinner now, easier to see through. You do, he said, and there was no pressure in his tone, no demand, just certainty, and that certainty pressed against me again, the same way it had before, from a different person, in a different place. And that was what made it worse. This was not just one person seeing me, it was two, from opposite directions, and I did not know how to exist in that space. I handed him the receipt, my fingers brushing the edge of the paper instead of his hand, careful, controlled. But even that felt like a reaction he noticed, because his gaze flicked down briefly, then back up. You should be careful who you trust, he added, and that made me look up despite myself, confusion cutting through everything else. Excuse me? I asked, and for the first time, something shifted in his expression, not softer, not kinder, but sharper, like he had revealed something he did not fully intend to. There are people who watch because they want to help, he continued, his voice still low, still controlled. And there are people who watch because they want control. My breath caught slightly, not because I did not understand what he was saying, but because I did, too well, and that realization settled heavy in my chest. Which one are you? I asked before I could stop myself, the question slipping out, raw and unfiltered, and for a moment, he just looked at me, really looked, like he was deciding whether to answer or not, whether I deserved that answer, and then he gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. That depends on who gets to you first, he said, and the words sent a quiet chill through me, because they did not feel like a warning. They felt like a statement, like something already in motion. He picked up his items then, turning away without another word, leaving me standing there with the register still open, the screen glowing, the receipt printer humming softly, and I realized that whatever this was, whatever had started outside and followed me here, it was no longer something distant. It was here, inside my routine, inside the one place I thought I understood, and for the first time, the store did not feel like a place I could disappear. It felt like a place where I could be found. I tried to keep working like nothing had changed, like the words he left behind had not settled somewhere deep enough to echo. But they did. They stayed, repeating quietly between each scan and each forced smile. People who watch to help, and people who watch to control, and I did not know which one scared me more anymore, because at least control was something I understood, something I had learned to predict, but help from someone like that. Help came with unknown rules, unknown consequences, and I did not know how to survive something I could not read. The hours dragged, each minute stretching longer than it should, my awareness refusing to settle. Every time the door chimed, my eyes lifted before I could stop them, searching, expecting, and sometimes it was nothing, just another customer, just another moment that meant nothing. But sometimes it was something, a glance that lingered too long, a shadow that moved where it should not, and I found myself questioning everything, every detail, every shift in the air, until normal no longer felt normal. It felt staged, like I was standing in a place that had been rearranged without my permission. Jinnah asked me twice if I was feeling okay, and both times I gave her the same answer, the same small smile, the same tired excuse, because explaining any of this would make it real in a way I was not ready for, and I was not even sure I understood it myself. My break came later than usual, the clock reading 2:17 in the afternoon, and I stepped outside behind the store where the delivery trucks parked, the air cooler there, quieter, removed from the constant noise inside. I leaned against the wall, closing my eyes for just a second, just long enough to feel something other than tension. But even that did not last, because the silence shifted again, not loudly, not suddenly, just enough to pull me back. I opened my eyes and he was there, not the man from the register, not the one from the car, but the one from the bus, standing a few feet away like he had always known I would be. Here, like this moment had been planned long before I stepped outside. My heart did not race this time. It tightened, controlled, bracing, because I was starting to understand that reacting would only give him something to work with. "You should not be alone back here," he said. The same tone, the same quiet certainty, and I let out a slow breath, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "You already said that," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected, and for a moment, something flickered in his expression, not surprise, but acknowledgement, like he had been waiting for me to stop pretending this was nothing. "And you did not listen," he said, and I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt absurd, the way he spoke like he had a right to expect that, like I owed him something I had never agreed to. "I do not know you," I said, the words sharper now, clearer, because that truth felt like the only thing I could hold on to. "You do not need to," he replied, stepping slightly closer, not enough to invade, but enough to make the distance feel intentional, measured. "You just need to understand that there are things happening around you that you are not seeing yet." My stomach tightened at that, not because I did not believe him, but because I was starting to, and that was the part that scared me. "Then tell me," I said, before I could stop myself, the question slipping out, driven by something I had tried to ignore, because if there was something I was missing, something I needed to see, then maybe knowing would give me some control back. Maybe it would make this feel less like something closing in and more like something I could navigate. But he shook his head slowly, his gaze steady. "Not here," he said, and those two words carried more weight than anything else he had said so far, because they implied something bigger, something outside of this moment, outside of this place, and I felt it again, that shift, that quiet pressure in the air, and this time it was not just coming from him. I turned my head slightly, just enough to glance toward the alley entrance, and there it was, subtle, almost easy to miss, the reflection of a black car in the glass of the delivery door, not parked, not idle, but present, waiting, and my chest tightened again, the realization settling deeper, heavier, because now it was undeniable. This was not coincidence. This was not random. This was something structured, something deliberate, something moving around me in ways I could not fully see. "You see it now," he said quietly, not asking, not guessing, just stating it like fact. And I did not answer, because there was nothing to say, nothing that would change what I was starting to understand. And for the first time since this began, I felt something shift inside me that was not fear, not confusion, but clarity, slow and unsettling, because I was no longer trying to deny it. I was inside something now, something with rules I did not know yet, and as I stood there, caught between the man in front of me and the presence waiting just beyond the corner, I realized that whatever came next was not going to be something I could ignore. It was going to be something I had to face, whether I was ready or not. I should have gone back inside right then, ended the conversation before it could pull me any deeper into something I did not understand, but my feet stayed where they were, like the ground beneath me had decided this was where I needed to be, between two forces I could not fully see, one standing in front of me speaking in calm, measured truths, the other waiting just out of sight, silent but constant. And I realized that leaving would not change anything anymore, because whatever this was, it had already found me. "Then tell me what happens if I ignore all of this," I said quietly, my voice steady but lower now, less defensive, more focused, because I needed something real, something I could hold on to, not just warnings that circled without landing. He studied me for a moment, not surprised, not impressed, just observing, like he had expected this question eventually. Then nothing changes, he said, and that answer hit harder than anything else, not because it was dramatic, but because it was not, because it was simple, direct, and completely believable. Nothing changes men. I go back to what I know, what I survive, what I endure, and for the first time, that felt heavier than stepping into the unknown. I swallowed, my throat tight, my mind moving faster now, connecting pieces I had tried not to see. And if I do not ignore it? I asked, and something in his expression shifted again, not softer, not warmer, but more precise, like the conversation had reached a point where answers mattered. Then things will change whether you are ready or not, he replied, and there it was again, that sense of inevitability, like this was not about choice as much as timing, like something had already been set in motion the moment someone decided to notice me. The sound of a car engine shifting pulled my attention again, my eyes flicking toward the alley entrance where the reflection had been, and this time the car was no longer just waiting. It had moved slightly, enough to make its presence unmistakable, and my chest tightened, not with panic, but with clarity, because now I understood something I had been avoiding. This was not about being watched anymore. This was about being positioned, placed between two directions that were slowly closing in. Why are they watching me? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it, because that was the part that still did not make sense. I was not important. I was not connected to anything worth this kind of attention. I was just me. And he did not answer right away, his gaze shifting briefly past me toward the same direction I had looked, acknowledging without reacting, like he had already accounted for it. Because you are connected to someone who made a mistake, he said finally, and my stomach dropped. Slightly at that. Because the answer did not feel distant, it felt close, too close. What kind of mistake? I asked, my voice quieter now, because something about the way he said it made me feel like I already knew, like the answer was not something new, but something I had been living with without naming. He stepped closer then, just enough that his voice did not need to carry, just enough that the space between us felt intentional, controlled, the kind that puts attention on everything around them, he said, and I felt it then, the full weight of it settling into place, not sudden, not explosive, but slow and undeniable, because I knew exactly who he meant, not by name, not out loud, but in the way my chest tightened, in the way my thoughts immediately shifted to the one person in my life who brought unpredictability with him like a shadow. And for the first time, I understood that this was not just about me. It never had been. I had just been standing too close to something I did not see clearly. So this is because of him, I said, more to myself than to him. And he did not correct me, did not confirm, just watched, letting the realization settle on its own, because people like him did not need to explain what was already obvious. I took a slow breath, my mind racing, my options narrowing, because now there was no pretending this was random, no pretending I could go back to before he walked into that store, before anyone noticed, before anything shifted. And you? I asked, lifting my gaze back to him, because there was one thing I still needed to understand, one thing that mattered more than anything else right now. Which one are you? And this time, when he looked at me, there was no pause, no hesitation, just a quiet certainty that felt heavier than any answer I had heard so far. The one who does not wait, he said, and before I could respond, before I could process what that meant, the sound of a car door closing echoed from the alley, sharper now, closer, and something inside me tightened instantly, because whatever came next was no longer approaching, it had arrived. The sound of that car door closing did not echo loudly, but it cut through everything, sharp enough to make my breath pause for just a second, and in that second, I understood something I had been trying not to admit. This moment was no longer about choices or questions. It was about timing, and whatever had been moving toward me had just reached its point. I did not turn right away, not because I did not want to see, but because I already knew what I would find, the kind of presence that did not need to announce itself loudly to be felt, the kind that changed the air just by existing in it. Stay where you are, the man in front of me said quietly, and this time there was something different in his voice, not louder, not harsher, but more defined, like the space between calm and action had just narrowed, and I felt it, that shift, like something had clicked into place. I turned slowly then, my eyes moving toward the alley entrance. And there he was, stepping fully into view now. No longer hidden by reflections or distance, his posture relaxed but his attention sharp, fixed entirely on me in a way that made everything else fade into the background. The distance between us was not far, maybe 15 feet, but it felt measured, intentional like. Every step he could take had already been considered. I swallowed, my hands instinctively stilling at my sides, because movement suddenly felt like something that could change everything. "Emily," he said, my name leaving his mouth in a way that made my chest tighten, not because of how he said it, but because of where we were, because of who was standing behind me, because of what I now understood this moment to be. "You left early this morning," he continued, his tone controlled, almost casual, like this was a normal conversation happening in a normal place. And that contrast made it worse, made everything feel sharper, more real. I did not answer right away, not because I did not know what to say, but because I was aware now, deeply aware, of the space I was standing in, of the presence behind me that had not moved, that had not spoken, but that I could feel as clearly as the ground beneath my feet. "I had work," I replied finally, my voice steady, quieter than usual, because raising it felt wrong, like it would break something I could not put back together. His gaze shifted briefly past me, not fully, just enough to acknowledge what was there, and then back to me. And in that small movement, I saw it. The tension, subtle but real, like two lines crossing without touching. "You should not be out here," he said, echoing words I had already heard today. But this time they felt different, heavier, because now I understood they were not coming from the same place, not carrying the same meaning. I almost laughed at that, at the strange symmetry of it, but the sound stayed trapped in my chest, because nothing about this felt light enough for laughter. "I am fine," I said instead, the same phrase, the same shield, but it felt thinner now than it ever had before, because I knew neither of them believed it. And for the first time, I was not sure I did either. "No, you are not," he replied, his voice still calm, still controlled, but there was something under it now, something closer to insistence than concern, and I felt the tension shift again, not outward, but inward, like everything around me was tightening in slow, deliberate increments. "She said she is fine," the man behind me spoke then, and the sound of his voice, closer now, more present, made my breath catch slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of it, because this was the first time they were both in the same space, the first time the two sides I had been feeling separately had finally collided. I did not turn, not yet, because I did not need to see him to know where he was. I could feel it, the way the air behind me had changed, the way everything had become more defined, more focused. "This does not concern you," the man in front of me said, his eyes no longer on me, but past me, his attention shifting fully now, and that shift was enough to make my chest tighten again, because I was no longer the center of this moment, I was the reason for it. "Everything around her concerns me," the voice behind me replied, calm, controlled, but carrying a certainty that felt heavier than anything else in this space. And that was when I understood fully, completely, that this was not just about watching anymore. This was about claiming space, about defining who had the right to stand where, to say what, to decide what happened next, and I was standing right in the middle of it, my name hanging in the air between them like something neither of them was willing to let go of. And for the first time since this began, I realized something that made everything else fall into place. This was never going to be a quiet ending, because the moment two people who refuse to step back decide to face each other, silence is no longer an option. I realized something in that moment that I had never understood before. Silence is not always safety. Sometimes silence is just the space before everything changes, and standing there between them, I could feel that space closing, tightening, like the world had narrowed down to this one place, this one moment, where neither of them was willing to step back. I did not move, not because I could not, but because I knew movement would mean choosing, and I was not ready to choose something I did not fully understand yet. "This is not your place," the man in front of me said, his voice calm but sharper now, directed fully past me, and I could feel the shift in him without even looking. The way his posture had changed just enough to signal that this was no longer a conversation. It was a line being drawn. "You are right," the voice behind me replied, just as calm, just as controlled. It is hers. And something about that answer made my breath catch, not because of the words themselves, but because of how they were said, like a statement that carried weight beyond the moment, like something already decided. I turned then, slowly, because I needed to see, needed to understand what I was standing between, and when I looked at him, really looked this time, I saw it clearly, not just the calm surface, not just the measured presence, but the certainty underneath, the kind that did not bend, did not hesitate. And for the first time, I understood why he had felt different from the beginning, because he was not watching to react, he was watching to act. You should leave, the man in front of me said again, and this time there was no mistaking it. The words were not for me. They were for him, and the space between them tightened further, invisible but undeniable, like two forces pressing against each other without touching. You are standing in the wrong place, the man behind me replied, and there was no edge to his voice, no threat, just a quiet certainty that made the air feel heavier, because it did not need to be louder to carry meaning. I do not stand in the wrong place, the other man said, and for the first time, something cracked through the calm, not loudly, not explosively, but enough to show that this was no longer balanced, that something had shifted from observation to confrontation, and I felt it, that moment when everything teeters, when one word, one step, one decision can change the direction completely. Stop, I said suddenly, the word coming out sharper than I expected, louder than anything I had said since this began, and both of them went still, not frozen, not caught off guard, but paused, like the moment had been interrupted just enough to redirect. I took a breath, steadying myself, because if I did not speak now, if I did not take something back, then I would lose whatever control I still had left. This is not something you get to decide without me. I continued, my voice steadier now, stronger, because saying it made it real, made it mine again, even if just for a moment. Their eyes were on me now, both of them, not past me, not through me, but on me, and that alone felt like a shift, like the center of the moment had moved back to where it should have been all along. You keep talking like I am not here, I said, my gaze moving between them, holding each of their attention just long enough to make the point. Land, like I am something to be handled, or protected, or watched. My chest tightened slightly, but I did not stop, because I needed them to hear this, needed them to understand that I was not just standing in the middle, I was part of this whether they wanted me to be or not. I am not something you fight over. I finished, and the words hung there, quiet but firm, and for a second, nothing moved, nothing shifted. Just that silence again, but this time it felt different, not empty, not waiting, but listening, and I saw it then. The smallest change, not in their posture, not in their stance, but in their attention, because for the first time since this began, they were not just aware of each other, they were fully aware of me, and that changed something, something subtle but real, because whatever this was, whatever had been building, it was no longer just about them deciding what happened next. It was about whether I would let them. And as I stood there, steady for the first time since all of this started, I realized something that made everything else shift into place. Power is not always about who stands the strongest. Sometimes it is about who refuses to step aside. And for the first time, I was not stepping aside. For a moment after I spoke, everything held still, not frozen, not broken, just recalibrating. Like the world itself needed a second to adjust to the fact that I had stepped forward instead of back. And I could feel it, the shift in their attention, no longer pulling me between them, but centering on me in a way that made my heartbeat slow instead of race. Because control, even a small piece of it, changes everything. Good, the man behind me said quietly, and I turned slightly, just enough to see him without fully breaking my stance. His expression unchanged on the surface. But there was something there now, something sharper, more defined, like he had been waiting for that moment, not to take over, but to confirm something. You are starting to understand, he added, and the words did not feel like praise, they felt like recognition, like I had crossed a line he had already seen coming. Understand what? I asked, my voice steady, because if I was stepping into this, I needed clarity, not half answers and controlled silences, and for a moment, he did not respond, his gaze shifting briefly to the man across from us, then back to me, measuring, calculating, and I realized that even now, even with me standing here, asserting myself. There were still layers I could not see, that this was never just about him. He said finally, and the words landed differently than I expected, because they did not point outward. They pointed inward, towards something I had not considered fully. Not until now. I felt my chest tighten slightly, my thoughts shifting, reordering, trying to catch up to what he was implying. Then what is it about? I asked, and this time, the answer came from the other side. It is about what happens when someone refuses to stay small, the man in front of me said, his voice quieter now, less confrontational, but no less firm, and I turned to him, really looking at him now, not just as the person who had followed me, who had watched me, but as someone who had been part of something bigger from the beginning, and I saw it then, not fear, not anger, but something closer to tension, like he understood the direction this was going and did not like it. You think this is about me changing something? I asked, and there was a part of me that almost wanted to dismiss it, to push it away as something too big, too abstract. But another part of me, quieter but stronger, knew better, knew that something had already started shifting the moment I stopped pretending nothing was happening. It already has, he replied, and there was no hesitation in his voice, no doubt, just certainty. And that certainty settled into me in a way that felt both grounding and unsettling at the same time. Because if that was true, then there was no going back, not to before, not to unnoticed, not to safe in the way I had defined it. You should leave, he added then. But this time the words were directed at me, not as a command, but as a suggestion, and I understood why, not because he was trying to protect me, but because he knew this moment was no longer stable, no longer contained. It was expanding, becoming something else, something neither of them would fully control, and I felt it too, that subtle pressure in the air, like something just beyond the edges of this moment was waiting to break through. I took a slow breath, grounding myself, because leaving would be easy, stepping away, walking back into the store, pretending this was over, but I knew it was not. I knew that whatever had started would follow me whether I stayed or went. No, I said quietly, and the word felt heavier than anything I had said so far, because it was not reactive, it was deliberate, chosen. Both of them looked at me again, and I held their gaze, not challenging, not defensive, just steady, because I understood something now that I had not before. This was not about choosing between them, it was about choosing myself. I am not leaving just because things are complicated. I continued, my voice even, controlled, and for the first time, it did not feel like I was forcing that control. It felt natural, like something I had always had but never used. The silence that followed was different from before, not tense, not waiting, but acknowledging, like something had been set into place that could not be undone, and I saw it then, in both of them, the smallest shift, not agreement, not acceptance, but recognition, because whatever this was, whatever had been building, it was no longer something happening around me. It was something happening with me, and as I stood there, not stepping back, not stepping away, I realized that the moment I stopped trying to survive quietly was the moment everything else started to move, not just around me, but because of me, and that meant one thing, whether I was ready or not. I was no longer just part of the story, I was changing it. The silence after my answer did not feel like the end of something. It felt like the beginning of something neither of them could fully control anymore. And for the first time since all of this started, I did not feel like I was being pulled in different directions. I felt still, grounded in a way that made everything else sharper, clearer, like the world had finally stopped spinning just long enough for me to see it as it really was. Then understand this, the man behind me said, his voice calm but heavier now, not pressing, not forcing, just stating something that carried weight beyond this moment. Once you stop being invisible, people do not forget you again. And I felt that settle into me, not as fear, but as truth. Because I had already seen it, already lived it in the past 24 hours, the way one glance had turned into attention, the way attention had turned into presence, and the way presence had turned into something that could not be ignored anymore. I turned slightly, looking at him fully now, not just as the man who had stepped in, but as someone who had chosen to stay, someone who had made a decision that involved me whether I agreed to it or not. And what happens if I do not want that? I asked. Because that question still mattered, still held weight. Even if I already suspected the answer, And he did not hesitate, not even for a second. Then you will learn how to live with it, he said, and there was no cruelty in his voice, no softness either, just reality, unfiltered and direct, and I realized then that he was not offering me a way out. He was showing me the shape of what I had already stepped into. I shifted my gaze to the other man, the one who had followed, the one whose presence had been quieter but no less persistent, and I saw something there too. Not dominance, not control, but something closer to calculation, like he was already adjusting, already rethinking the way this would play out now that I was no longer standing still. You think this changes things, he said, and it was not a question, it was an observation. One that carried just enough skepticism to make it clear he was not convinced yet. And I held his gaze, not challenging, not defensive, just steady, because I understood something now that I had not before. This was not about proving anything to them. It was about not losing myself in whatever this was becoming. It already has, I replied, echoing his earlier words. And for a moment, something in his expression shifted, not enough to name, not enough to define, but enough to show that he had heard it, really heard it. The sound of the city moved around us again. Cars passing, voices in the distance, the normal world continuing. Like this moment did not exist, like nothing had changed, but everything had, at least for me. This is not over, he said after a second, his voice quieter now, less confrontational, but no less certain, and I believed him, not because I was afraid of what that meant, but because I had already felt it. The way this had unfolded step by step, the way it had built into something that could not simply stop. I know, I answered, and for the first time, those words did not feel like resignation. They felt like acceptance, not passive, not defeated, but aware, grounded, ready in a way I had not been before. The man behind me stepped forward then, just slightly, not enough to close the distance completely, but enough to make his presence unmistakable. To make it clear that he was not stepping back, not now, not later, not at all. Then we understand each other, he said, his voice calm, final in a way that suggested he did not need anything else from this moment. And I realized that was true. This was not about convincing or arguing anymore. It was about acknowledging what had already been set in motion. The other man held my gaze for one last second, like he was committing something to memory, something he would return to later. And then he turned, stepping back toward the street, his presence receding but not disappearing, not really, because I knew now that distance did not mean absence, not in this, not anymore. I watched him go, my chest steady, my thoughts clear in a way they had not been since this began, and when I finally turned back, the man beside me had not moved, had not shifted, just waited, like he always did, like he always would. You are not afraid, he said, not asking, not doubting, just stating what he saw, and I took a breath, considering that, feeling it settle, because fear had been there. It had been constant, quiet, shaping everything I did without me even realizing it. But now it felt different, not gone, but changed, like it no longer controlled the direction I moved in. I said honestly, because that mattered too. Truth mattered now more than anything else. But I am not standing still anymore. And something in his expression shifted, not softer, not warmer, but approving in a way that felt almost imperceptible, like a line had been crossed that could not be uncrossed. Good, he said simply, and that one word carried more meaning than anything else, because it was not just about this moment, it was about everything that would follow.